The sun had barely touched the ridge when the children came running barefoot through the frost-kissed grass, cheeks flushed with breathless laughter. Morning dew clung to their hems like crystal anklets, their voices rising like bird-song in the quiet hush of the prairie. The boy, a sprightly 7, carried a slingshot tucked in his belt. The girl, not yet 6, clutched a half-wilted daisy in her hand, as if she could will it to live just by loving it enough. From the porch of the small cedar cabin, Etta watched them with a stillness earned only through loss. Her fingers worked steadily through the mending of a torn shirt sleeve, not hers, not theirs, but belonging to a neighbor too proud to ask and too poor to buy new. Her hands, callous but graceful, danced over the fabric like a memory she never meant to remember. The world still called her a widow, though no grave bore his name. She lived a whisper away from town, where the wind spoke louder than men did, and the trees bent like old women over a secret. Her cabin stood firm, patched with time and stubborn hope, a place built with her own hands after the war took more than it had the right to. It took her husband, her home, her voice for a while. The children weren't hers by blood. Everyone knew that. But they clung to her with a love deeper than any cradle-born bond. The girl called her Mama first, a slip of the tongue that came on a fevered night when the girl had nearly died from smoke in the lungs. Etta had stayed up 3 nights by her side, feeding her broth drop by drop, singing that old lullaby from her own childhood, the one her mother had hummed through closed lips. The boy had taken longer. He had watched from a distance at first, too old for softness, too young to understand what safety felt like. But when she'd fixed his shoes with new soles and taught him to fish with patience rather than curses, he had melted. Not all at once, but enough. Their real mother had died in a barn 3 winters ago, skin turned gray, breath rattling like dry leaves. Etta had found them curled beside the stiff body, too quiet, too still. She hadn't thought. She just lifted the girl first, then the boy, and never looked back. She never asked who their father was. They never offered. It didn't matter. She gave them what she had, which wasn't much. Warm bread when flour allowed. Stories by firelight when storms rose. A home, if not a history. They gave her something she didn't know she could still feel, purpose. A rhythm to her days. And yet when the wind blew just right, whispering through the slats, it brought the scent of tobacco and leather and river water. It brought his memory, uninvited. Her husband had left with a kiss on her temple and a folded note tucked into her apron. * Be back by Christmas. Keep the kettle warm. * That Christmas never came. The letter stopped. The war didn't. One morning, a man in uniform came riding up with a torn satchel and news she couldn't hear without falling to her knees. There was no body, no burial, just the absence of everything. For 2 years she waited, then wandered, then wept. And then, she stitched herself a new name, thread by thread. Not Etta the bride, or the widow. Just Mama, as the children whispered into her shawl at night. She stood now, brushing crumbs from her lap, watching the children roll in the grass, their laughter loud enough to keep the ghosts at bay. Down the road, a wagon creaked past. The man riding it gave her a polite nod. He didn't stop. No one did anymore, unless they needed something fixed or stitched or softened. She was known for quiet kindness. And quiet people often got mistaken for weak ones. She stepped down from the porch and called out, voice low but steady. Time for breakfast, wild things. They came at once, tumbling toward her, the boy tugging on her skirt, the girl pressing the crumpled daisy into her palm. Etta accepted it like it was spun gold, kissed the girl's cheek, and led them inside. The cabin smelled of rye and ash and something faintly sweet. She moved with ease through the space, placing bowls, slicing bread, spooning jam into chipped pottery. They talked between bites, the girl describing a bird with blue feathers, the boy boasting about the rabbit tracks he'd spotted. Etta listened, nodded, laughed when it was time to laugh. But when the girl asked, suddenly, innocently, Mama, did Papa die in the war too? Etta stilled. The knife slipped slightly in her hand, grazing her thumb. She didn't flinch. She looked at the girl, then at the boy. His eyes were too old for his face. She opened her mouth, closed it, then began to hum that lullaby again, barely above a breath. The children leaned into the sound, swaying like small trees in the wind. She turned toward the stove, hiding the tears she didn't let fall. Outside, the wind shifted. A new scent arrived, faint but unmistakable. Leather. Horse wet. Cedar oil. She stiffened. From the corner window, a rider approached along the ridge, alone, slow, shadowed by the rising sun. She didn't see his face. Only the way he rode, like he carried the weight of too many miles and not enough hope. Her heart forgot how to beat for a moment. And when the girl tugged her sleeve, whispering, asterisk, "Who's that, Mama?" Asterisk. Etta said nothing. Just pressed the daisy between the pages of her old hymnal and watched the rider disappear behind the hill, as if the past itself had grown legs, and finally found its way home. The sun hung high and sharp in the sky as the stranger rode into town, the dust curling off his boots like forgotten prayers. His horse, a dappled chestnut, moved slow, not from weariness, but caution, as though it knew the road behind had ghosts, and the road ahead held reckoning. He wore his hat low, shadowing eyes the color of creekstone, and his coat, worn at the collar and split at the seams, held the smell of rain, sweat, and long-buried memories. The townsfolk glanced up as he passed. Not with fear. Just curiosity. The kind reserved for men who came from nowhere and didn't ask for directions. He stopped at the well, dismounted without a word, and let the reins fall loose. His hands were cracked from weather and time, and when he leaned into the pulley, the creak of the rope was the loudest sound on the street. A boy nearby stopped playing marbles and stared. The stranger drank straight from the tin cup, water trailing down the line of his jaw, soaking into a faded red kerchief. Then he turned. "Is there a woman here by the name of Etta?" His voice was low, like wind passing through a canyon. Measured. Controlled. The type of voice that didn't beg for answers but expected them. The general store owner, a paunchy man named Doolin, paused in sweeping his step. He looked up, squinted, and gave a tight nod. "Used to be," he said, drawing the bristles of the broom across the boards. "Long time back. Folks say she passed." The stranger's face didn't shift. But something in his shoulders dropped. Not in defeat, just enough to suggest the weight he carried had grown heavier. "When?" he asked. Doolin scratched his beard, then shrugged. "Years ago. Hard to say if it's truth or tale. She vanished after the war. Some say she died out on the plains. Others say she ran west." He paused. "Why?" The man didn't answer. Just nodded once, tight and slow, like the question had been fair but not necessary. He climbed back onto his horse and turned toward the edge of town, where the land softened and the road bent like a question mark toward the hills. Behind him, Doolin watched for a long moment, then muttered, "Dead or not, that woman's name still haunts like thunder in dry grass." The rider passed a cluster of cottonwoods, the town thinning behind him. He wasn't following a trail. He followed memory, the scent of lilacs on her shawl, the sound of her bare feet against cabin floors, the shape of her name whispered into the night. For years he'd believed her gone. Not just misplaced by time, but claimed by the cruel arithmetic of war. They'd sent him to Virginia, then Georgia, then somewhere nameless with red soil and no horizon. His unit had scattered. He'd been taken. The camp had been a place without days, just hunger and sickness and silence. By the time he'd crossed back into freedom, the maps had changed and home was only a rumor. He had searched, yes. But not loud. Not wide. Just enough to let hope die slow. He had returned once, briefly years ago. Found a burned church, 2 empty houses, and one neighbor who claimed the war had turned her to smoke. But smoke never settles. Now, here he was. Drawn by a letter that was never meant for him. Found in a used Bible at a roadside auction. Her handwriting, unmistakable. Just one page, pressed between Psalms and Revelation. "I still hum our song when the wind comes through the pines." He didn't know if it was old or recent. He just knew it was real. He followed instinct, not reason, toward the outskirts. A narrow road split the prairie, overgrown but worn in the center from wagon wheels. He slowed as he reached a hill and saw a cabin tucked beneath it, humble, cedar-planked, with smoke curling from the chimney like breath in cold air. He stopped. 2 children played in the yard. A boy and a girl, bare-legged and wild-haired, tumbling through the grass like puppies. The girl wore a dress too big for her, tied at the waist with a piece of twine. The boy had the same long stride he once had at that age, when he chased frogs through riverbeds and dreamed of horses and sky. And then, she stepped out. He didn't see her face clearly. Just the motion, the way she gathered her skirt in one hand, how she moved with a grace built from necessity. She turned slightly, brushing hair from her cheek, and he saw the line of her jaw, the tilt of her head. And then the sound, a faint hum, caught on the wind. It was the song. He could have cried right then. But he didn't. He just watched. She didn't see him. He turned the horse and rode back down the ridge, slower this time. He needed space to breathe, to let the thought become a truth he could hold without shattering. He didn't know who the children were. They looked nothing like him, nothing like her. But they called her Mama, he was sure of that. The way they clung to her skirts, the way she bent down to kiss their heads. It wasn't performance. It was marrow deep. Back in town, he tied the horse beside the livery and stepped into the saloon, ordered nothing, just sat in the far corner with his hands folded tight. He thought of the day they married, her fingers trembling around wildflowers. Thought of the night he left, and how her eyes stayed dry until he disappeared from view. A boy brought him a telegram slip. Not for him, but he read it anyway. It was addressed to the sheriff. A woman in town had been reported keeping children not her own. A relative of the dead mother, maybe. The state was coming to check. His jaw tensed. Outside, the wind picked up again, and he knew what he had to do. He left the paper on the bar, half folded. Then he walked toward the cabin, not like a soldier returning from war, but like a man finally remembering who he'd promised to be. And as the prairie bent with the breeze, her voice reached him again, clear this time, the hum turning to words, soft and certain. It was their song. She was alive. And she was not alone. The knock came just after sunset, quiet as a memory. Etta had been stirring the coals, the smell of roasted beans warming the small cabin, when it broke through the hush. Not a desperate pounding. Just a single, deliberate sound against wood, like someone asking permission to step back into time. She wiped her hands on her apron, heart ticking slow and steady, the way it did before a thunderstorm. The children were asleep in the loft above, their breathing soft as cotton. Outside, the wind curled through the grasses, pulling against the walls like it, too, wanted to come inside. She opened the door. And for a moment, time did nothing. It didn't leap or stutter or howl. It simply stopped. He stood on the threshold, the man she'd buried without ever finding the grave. He looked older, thinner, the sharp lines of his youth worn into something gentler, sadder. His eyes, those same deep gray eyes, met hers like a hand reaching through fog. She didn't speak. Her breath caught halfway to her lips, not from disbelief, but from something worse, belief that came too fast. He removed his hat. The silence between them stretched wide, not empty, but aching. His throat moved like it hurt to swallow. "I didn't die," he said. She nodded, slowly. "I can see that." Her voice cracked, soft and brittle as winter grass. She hadn't meant it to sound bitter, but it was hard to unlearn the shape sorrow had carved into her. He stepped inside only when she turned away. The cabin was warm and lived in, smells of broth and bread, a quilt draped over a rocking chair, hand-stitched curtains softening the windows. His eyes traced the space, cataloging it all. None of it familiar. And yet, it felt like her. Still. Etta poured water from the kettle into 2 tin mugs and sat across from him at the table, a lantern between them casting a flickering light across their faces. For a time, they drank in silence, like settlers who'd forgotten how to speak the same language. He set his mug down, fingers trembling just enough to betray him. "I tried to find you. I waited 3 years, she said. Then I stopped. He closed his eyes. I came back and found nothing, he whispered. Your father had passed. The house burned. No one knew where you'd gone. I didn't want to be found, she replied, voice lower now. I was tired of being a ghost. His eyes opened, heavy with unspoken apologies. I should have tried harder. She didn't argue. What would be the point? Regret didn't build bridges. It only watched from the shore. I thought you were dead, she said quietly. Not gone. Not missing. Dead, the army said so. Your captain brought your boots. He flinched, as though the memory itself still wore blood. I wasn't even allowed to grieve properly, she continued, breath hitching. People said I was lucky I didn't bear a child. That I could start fresh. That I was young. And did you? He asked, voice barely above a murmur. Her eyes flashed. No. I didn't. He looked down. I never stopped loving you. Etta leaned back in her chair. Love's a strange thing. It can stretch so far you don't recognize its shape anymore. The words hung between them like laundry in wind, pulling every direction. After a long pause, she stood and walked to the hearth. Her hands trembled as she ladled soup into a bowl, placed it in front of him. He nodded a quiet thanks, took the spoon, and began to eat slowly, as if each bite were another step into the past. When he'd finished, she cleared the dish and returned to her seat. I heard a rumor, she said, not looking at him. That a man rode into town asking for me. That someone in the sheriff's office received a letter, questioning my right to keep the children. He looked up. She met his eyes, steady now. Was it you? No, he said firmly. But I read the letter. Someone wants to take them from you. They're not mine, she said. Not by blood. Doesn't matter. It will to the courts. He leaned forward. What if it didn't? A long silence settled. She blinked. What are you saying? I'm saying, if someone stood beside you, someone legal, someone who could claim them as his too. He let the words drift, unfinished but clear. Her lips parted, a breath caught between anger and confusion. You can't just walk back into my life and... I'm not trying to undo the years, he said quickly. I'm only trying to honor them. What you've done. Who you became. I'm not asking for your heart. I just... He faltered, then looked toward the loft. I just want to help protect what's already yours. Etta looked away, her fingers curling into her skirt. Emotion rose too fast in her chest, not joy, not grief, but something messier. A mix of relief and fear. I don't know if I can trust you, she whispered. He nodded. Then let me earn it. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows with sudden force. A whimper floated down from the loft, followed by small footsteps. The girl padded into view, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She stopped when she saw the man at the table. Who's that, Mama? Etta froze. The man turned slowly, eyes wide and soft. He smiled, not broadly, but gently, like someone looking at the moon after years in the dark. I'm a friend, he said, voice tender. The girl blinked, then moved closer, climbing onto Etta's lap and curling there like she always had. Her little hand found the hem of Etta's sleeve and clung. The girl looked up again. He looks like the man in your locket. Etta stilled. The man met her gaze, and something shifted in the quiet. Not clarity. Not resolution. But the weight of what was lost, brushing up against what could still be found. In that moment, she didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She only whispered, You should stay the night. And from the loft above, the boy stirred, his voice low, unsure, echoing down. Is he gonna take our mama away? Etta's heart stopped. And the man, after a long breath, replied, No, son. I came to bring her back. The rain came heavy, sudden, like a grief remembered too late. It turned the dirt path to soup and clung to the cabin roof like fingers tapping for entry. Inside, the fire crackled against the chill, but Etta stood near the window, one hand pressed to the glass, watching shadows move through the storm. He was chopping wood, coat soaked through, hair plastered to his neck. Each strike echoed against the trees, steady, deliberate, as if the rhythm helped him think. Or forget. She should have stopped him. Called him in. But part of her needed to see if he'd stay through the weather. Not just storms of sky, but storms of judgment, too. Word had spread. The town's quiet stares had become murmurs. Murmurs, letters. Letters, inquiries. A stranger returning from the dead. A woman living with children not her own. Two sleeping under the same roof, unwed. Today, a telegram had come from the county office. Etta had read it with a fist in her throat. A hearing had been scheduled. The children would be reviewed. Their placement questioned. She hadn't told them yet. How do you explain to a child that love might not be enough? Behind her, the girl giggled from her seat by the fire, drawing crooked flowers with a stub of charcoal on the hearthstones. The boy, more solemn, stared into the flames, brows knit like he knew something was coming but didn't know where from. When the door creaked open and he stepped in, soaked, breath visible in the air, Etta met him with a towel and silence. He took it with a grateful nod, rubbed his face, and shook his coat out onto the floorboards. I saw Doolin in town, he said, voice soft. He said the sheriff's coming out this week. She nodded once. They mean to take them, she whispered. I won't let them. She looked at him, really looked. Water dripped from his hair, but there was fire behind his eyes. Not the kind that burned. The kind that warmed. They're not yours, she said. They're yours, he replied. That's enough. Silence stretched. The fire cracked. The girl hummed, lost in her sketching. Then she whispered, without looking up. Are they gonna take me away? Etta's chest tightened. She dropped to her knees, pulling the girl into her arms, rocking her gently, whispering no, no, no like it was a prayer. The boy stood now too. He didn't speak. Just walked to the corner, pulled his coat on without a word. Where are you going? Etta asked, rising. He didn't answer. Just slipped out the door. Panic surged fast. She turned to the man. I'll get him, he said quickly, already at the door. I'm coming with you. They moved fast, lantern in hand, boots sinking into the mud. Rain soaked their clothes, faces, bones. Lightning flashed across the hills, carving light into sky. They called his name, once, then again, louder. No answer. He checked the creek first, then the barn, then the tree where the boy often left traps for squirrels. Empty. And then, a small shape, huddled beneath the churchyard steps, arms wrapped around knees. The man reached him first, kneeling low. The boy didn't flinch, but his jaw was tight, his eyes red. I didn't want them to come while I was there, he said. I didn't want to see her cry. The man nodded. That's brave. But running won't stop em. I know. His voice trembled. But they're not real. My first parents. They left me. The man took a long breath, then sat beside him, letting the rain wash over both. I don't know if I deserve to call myself your father, he said. But I'd like to try. And I'll fight for you, not because I have to. Because I want to. The boy looked at him, eyes glassy. Even if I'm not yours? He smiled gently. Especially then. The boy leaned into him, just a little. Enough to break the dam. When they returned, soaked and shivering, Etta wrapped them both in quilts, pressed kisses to both foreheads, and held them close like anchors. The girl joined, squeezing between arms and shoulders until they were a single knot of warmth. They didn't speak again that night. Just sat before the fire, the sound of the rain softening into a lullaby. Later, when the children were asleep again, she turned to him, voice low. They're going to ask questions. About legality. About blood. He nodded. Then let me give them a name. She stilled. I mean it, he said. Not just to shield them. I want to stay. Build a life with what's here. Not the one we lost, the one you made when no one else did. Tears welled, slow and hot. I don't want to marry you out of fear. Then don't, he said. Do it for them. Do it for you. Or don't at all. But let me stand beside you anyway. She reached for his hand, threaded her fingers through his, rough against callous, but steady. And outside the storm passed, as all storms do. By dawn, the fields were quiet again. But the town wasn't. A knock sounded sharp against the door. Etta rose, heart pounding. 2 men stood on the porch, one in uniform, the other in a dark coat, holding a stack of papers. Miss Etta, one said. We're here about the children. Her hand found the doorframe. The man stepped beside her without a word. The children peeked from the loft, eyes wide. Please, the girl whispered, too softly for anyone to hear but the wind. Don't take our mama. And then, a third voice spoke from the yard. I wouldn't if I were you. They turned. Doolan stood at the gate, arms crossed. Behind him, others began to gather. The seamstress. The baker. The old midwife. A dozen faces Etta had once helped, fed, stitched, sheltered. The man in the dark coat frowned. Who are you? Doolan smiled thinly. Folks who know what family looks like. Etta's breath caught. And as the sky lightened over the ridge, the truth settled soft and sure. She wasn't alone anymore. And this time, the town would fight to keep her.